My name's Adam Hanlon. Welcome back to Wetpixel Live. Alex Must and I got a bit carried away in our episode on equipment, so we decided to split it into two separate short films. This is the second of those. If you haven't seen the first, please go back to the YouTube channel and have a look at the first. You can view them separately, but of course it makes sense to say if you view them together. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this, and I look forward to hearing if you have any comments or suggestions in the suggestions box below. Thanks very much.
I think that kind of links to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which was suits.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's much in terms of suit choice that, for me, is really linked to underwater photography. I think it's really important wherever you travel in the world that you have the right suit for the place.
Yeah.
You don't just have one great big thick suit and then you're always having to wear a very thick suit that's particularly possibly too warm in an area, and therefore you're wearing more weight and you've got more compression to deal with. So it's important to do that research before trips, find out what the expected water temperature is.
Yep.
And if you've got the contacts, find out what the actual water temperature is.
Yep.
And take the right suit for the job.
Yep.
I think also it's important to invest in new neoprene. Neoprene, particularly if you dive a lot, it gets worn out in terms of its thermal efficiency. Your suit can still look quite new, but your old
flat.
5mm has got no warmth in it at all.
Yep.
And new neoprene is really valuable. And as an underwater photographer, you're typically swimming less than your average diver. And if you start to go cold, your head does not stay in the underwater photography space. It's gone. You're never going to take those killer shots that really require you to really think about your photography when you start going cold.
Yep. So in terms of suits, one of the things Alex mentioned, pockets. I have pockets on my suit, on my wetsuits now. I wish more manufacturers would put pockets on wetsuits. It's something that they don't, but that's a really good solution to putting stuff, to carrying stuff. I find them easier to get at than BCD pockets. And the second thing I was going to mention, and top cheat is, I nearly always travel with a hooded vest, and the one I have currently is one of the Fourth Element thermocline ones, so it's a fleece rather than a neoprene, so it's equivalent of 3mm, but it's a hooded vest. A hooded vest is much warmer than just a hood because it eliminates the water from flushing out around your neck, and it makes a huge difference to your warmth. So when you're doing multiple dives on a day on a photography trip, and by the end you're starting to cool down, it's a really useful thing. You can just add it under your wetsuit. It doesn't change your buoyancy much, and it just gives you that little bit of extra warmth that can make a huge difference for very little bulk, weight or expense. It's a really, really good tool to have.
I'd like to pick up on both of those actually. Is another really popular addition that a lot of underwater photographers love are the cargo pants, the underwater shorts that you can put on over your wetsuit that have got the big pockets in them, and then you can switch them from wetsuit to wetsuit, so you don't have to have a pocket fitted to all your wetsuits. In terms of I'm also a really big fan of the Fourth Element thermocline suits, and I dive in those a lot. I was actually the picture when we did the talk about Martin Edge's book last week. I was the picture of me in there. I'm wearing my thermocline suit, and the reason I love that suit is that first of all, it's a good level of warmth for the warmer tropical diving. But it's neutrally buoyant, so you don't need to dive any extra lead. And I actually normally dive in that suit with an aluminium cylinder, lightweight regs, and I dive with no lead. And I find that, so that's really nice. You don't have the aches and pains from wearing a weight belt. I don't have to travel with weight pockets. I take them off my BCD. My BCD is smaller and lighter for travel because I know I'm going to dive with no lead. And that's a really nice way to dive. Also with that suit, because it's got no neoprene in it, you can do hundreds and hundreds of dives in it, and it keeps the same warmth. You start doing a couple of hundred dives in a wetsuit, and it loses a lot of that warmth. So I really like those suits.
And you can machine wash them.
Yeah. We'll avoid any of those things. And I think I'm going to... the final thing I'd say about suits, particularly with dry suits, is I'm not a big fan of the traditional across the back of the shoulders dry suit zip. Because I think that is kind of a little bit like diving with a coat hanger down your back.
Exactly.
And the one thing you need, and for a normal diver, that's absolutely fine. But for an underwater photographer, you need that shoulder maneuverability when you're twisting for shots with your camera. And if you've got a coat hanger down your back, you haven't got that maneuverability in your shoulders. So I prefer a front zip or a front zip dry suit or a Y zip dry suit, or at least if you are getting a back zip dry suit, one with a more flexible zip. I think all those things really help you with your shoulder maneuverability, which is the critical thing as an underwater photographer to find those really good angles.
Yep.
I think we should move on from suits
Yep.
and go on to fins.
Yep.
I guess get to the other end of the body.
So fins, I mean, this really is that you need to choose the right fin for the right job. There is no one fin that does everything perfectly. Dry suits, inevitably open heel. Different people will like different things. There's no point in, but generally, I think that when you're diving in a macro destination where you're possibly not swimming a great deal, you can get away with using a very cheap, light, flexible fin. Conversely, if you're going somewhere where you've got schools of fish, possibly there's more currents around, you may need to go towards a much stiffer, longer, more freediving type fin. I would caution on the very long freediving fins. Generally, freedivers don't fin a lot. They're not designed for swimming distances. Freedivers do 3 or 4 big fin kicks, and that's it. Then they stop and they sink. Unless you've got very powerful legs, a sort of medium length freediving fin, not the really long apnea freediving fins, is a good option. But again, only choose those in circumstances where you anticipate you need the power of the fin. So I guess the idea here is you choose your fin according to what you anticipate your diving conditions are going to be like.
Yeah. As a traveling underwater photographer doing a lot of tropical trips, I tend to use nearly always full foot fins, so fins with foot molded, and that's really a weight saving choice. But I tend to buy nice ones. I don't tend to buy the cheapest swimming pool fins. I try and buy ones that have got a good amount of thrust and power. I do fit the mold of someone with very powerful legs. If you've seen me in silhouette, you'll be aware of that. And as a result, I have plenty of power when I need it for those. I do have a pair of freediving fins that I predominantly use for freediving for big animal trips, but I do dive with them, particularly in the East Pacific places where you're generally in the blue with big schools of fish. You often maybe need to motor some distances, Galapagos, Socorro, that sort of place.
Yeah.
But my freediving fins are soft ones.
Yeah.
They're cresty ones, and they're called long distance. They don't make that one anymore, but they make an equivalent ones, and they're designed for someone who's going to go out freediving all day. And so they're not super stiff carbon fiber ones, which are really tough to kick, and they're designed for that 1 or 2 kicks and glide. These are much softer, easier to swim with, and they're, I think, more suited for that kind of sort of transition scuba look. But generally, for underwater photography, big long fins are just something that's more likely to damage the environment. So next, we should probably deal with the other sticky outfit gloves. Your lovely red gloves. My
lovely red gloves that go pink underwater. It's all right. I can live with it.
You can own that pink.
Yeah.
Actually, I have quite a few pink T-shirts. When Isabella watches me getting dressed in the morning, she's like, the pink one. So
there you go.
Shit, yeah. So
gloves. The first point about gloves. Gloves are there to keep your hands warm, not to protect you from the environment, or they should be, I feel. It's a very good point. I don't wear gloves to insulate me from the environment. You wear gloves to insulate me from the water temperature. And obviously, with that in mind, if it's cold, I need bigger, thicker gloves, dry gloves like the ones I've just shown you. If it's warmer, I will tend to be... In fact, Alex and I were talking about this. I actually very, very rarely use neoprene gloves now. So if the water temperature's cold enough, I just put dry gloves on. If it's not cold enough, I just go barehanded. So very, very important. I think the problem with gloves is they encourage people to touch things that they probably otherwise wouldn't. And that's obviously something that we don't want to happen. So
yeah, I do think there's an increasing trend for divers, particularly in Asia, not from Asia, but divers from all over when they're in Asia, diving in gloves. Yeah. And I think it's something that I think as underwater photographers we should be standing up to, because the reason those people are wearing those gloves is so they can get their hands on everything. Not always on the subject, but it means that they're grabbing onto the reef to maybe steady themselves without checking what they're going to touch. There's plenty of places underwater you can perfectly sensibly put your fingers down and secure yourself to take a photo. As soon as you put those gloves on, you just grab whatever's there without even looking. Yeah. And that can be very bad for the life that's living there. Yeah. So, I'm a big believer in I don't wear gloves in the tropics. I do wear neoprene gloves. I don't have dry gloves on my dry suit currently. I think that's partly because I'm diving a slightly different temperature range than you typically. Yeah. In terms of Celsius, you do a lot of diving sub 10 degrees Celsius, single figure Celsius. Yeah. I'm generally diving plus 10 degrees, sort of teens, a lot of the time. And in those temperatures, I'm either wearing 5mm or 3mm gloves. And I do own several pairs of gloves, and I'll be very keen to go to the thinnest ones as quickly as I can to increase my dexterity on my camera. But at the same time, obviously, I don't want my fingers to go cold and stop working. So it's about finding the right balance.
And I think one of the things that possibly, which is when you are choosing your gloves, when you're selecting your gloves, and it's a good idea to take your housing with you to see what you can work and what you can't. So take your housing along to the dive shop, try the gloves on, try the buttons, see what works, because certainly not all gloves will necessarily work with all housings and vice versa. So
yeah, and one thing that works really well with both your Seacam housings and the Nauticam housings is this space between the handle of the housing and the housing itself to shove a gloved hand. And when you've got the padding of a glove, you can actually squeeze it your hand inside the handle of the housing. And actually, that's a really great way of clamping the housing to your hand. And it gives you the ability to shoot one-handed actually really well. So it's something I do quite a lot when I'm using either of those housings on a cold water dive. Okay, the final subject is dive computers. And obviously, we choose dive computers for a number of reasons. If you're diving, particularly a second computer as an underwater photographer, I think a wristwatch style computer is a great way of saving weight for travel. But the thing I wanted to talk about was something that I believe I started. And it's not what I want to be remembered for in underwater photography as my great contribution. But I think I was the first person to start mounting a dive computer onto my strobe arms, and it's something that's become incredibly widespread over the last 10 years. And actually, this started for me when I had a big, which I still use actually. I've done 2,500 dives on it, so I've had it a while. A big Galileo Sol computer. And when I used to wear it on my sleeve, particularly with the dry suit I had at the time, which had very tapered arms, the tapered arms would cause it to slide down onto my wrist, and it would stop me moving my hand, and it was very annoying. And so I was looking for another place to put this nice computer. And just about that time, buoyancy floats for strobe arms had just come out. And so it was the first time that you could actually, and I attached it onto my strobe arms, really just from it wasn't comfortable on my arm. And what I realized is actually that was a much nicer place to have it, because it was now in my eye line all the time. And I do a lot of shooting, with schools of fish in the open water. And I'm very, very good at being out in the blue and keeping my eye on my computer all the time and using it to measure my depth. I'm not one of these divers that suddenly looks and they're at 45 meters. I know my depth all the time really well. And particularly for critter diving, I do a lot of that on my own. And depth is one of your best ways to be able to re-find an animal. And whenever, if I'm in Lembe or something, I know the depth of everything I've shot on that dive. And it's the easiest way to get back to stuff. It's actually what the dive guides always talk to you. It's always the pygmy at 14.5 or the frogfish at 18 meters. They know exactly, they do everything by depth. And actually keeping that depth in your mind all the time is actually really valuable for your photography, not just from the safety of watching your decompression time and your air as well. And I know something you were very keen on as well, is having an air integrated computer and actually having your air up there as well, so that it's again in your eye line. It's not, where's that gauge gone? Oh my God, that's a shot. It's there all the time, and you know where you are. Those cameras are a big distraction.
The early days of air integration were a bit of a problem with strobes, and you get strobe off near them and they went blanked out and stopped signaling and stuff. But the ones now are very, very reliable, and being able to literally just lift your eye from the viewfinder briefly, take in your air supply, your depth, your dive time, all the important parameters that you need to stay safe underwater is really, really important. And I find that if I've got to look at my wrist, I just don't do it as often as I should. So by having it on my strobe arm, I always have it on my right strobe arm. I'm literally shooting, lift my eye, shoot. And the camera hasn't changed position. My hands, it works really, really well. And I have to say that
you're welcome, Adam.
I think you were the first person that I saw doing it. So I'll give you credit for it.
Yeah, I'm sure others may have tried it, but actually it was sort of that confluence of time that I had a particular dry suit at the time that I couldn't mount a wrist-mounted computer. I'd just been given a very nice wrist-mounted computer, and buoyancy arms had just come out, so there was actually the arms were the right size to mount. They were similar size to a wrist, so they were the right size to mount, and those things all came together at about the right time for me.
So lots of food for thought there. I hope it's been useful. These are obviously all our ideas, and I'm sure lots of you will have other ideas. So please feel free to discuss those, and Alex and I will take on board any thoughts that you may have as well, because it's a topic that everyone has ideas on.
You definitely learn a lot of this stuff by trips, and one of the reasons that the old computer on the strobe arm has become so widespread is that run lots of workshops, lots of photographers see others doing it, and it's it really fertilizes itself around. And I've picked up a huge number of those tips from diving with other people.
Yeah, brilliant. So thank you, Alex. We'll catch you on the next episode. If you want to look at Alex's pictures, have a look on Instagram at
AlexMustard1.
There we are. All right. And thank you to you all for watching. I'd like to thank Backscatter Photo and Video for sponsoring this episode. If you, as I mentioned before, if you'd like to discuss what we've talked about, add suggestions for future topics, or to like it, please do so. And please subscribe to the channel so we can carry on making some more of these. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.